I've been driving long-haul trucks for years, and let me tell you, I thought I'd seen it all. From tire blowouts in the middle of nowhere to breakdowns on remote highways, you name it. But nothing compares to what happened last winter on Route 137. That night, I can barely explain it without my stomach twisting into knots. It was late, well after midnight, and the snow had been falling for hours. The forecast said it was going to be one of the worst storms of the year, but deadlines don't care about the weather. So I kept my rig, number 4829, moving. The snow was coming down so thick, it felt like the world was slowly being swallowed up. I could hardly see a few feet in front of me. The windshield wipers thrashed back and forth, barely making a dent in the storm. My headlights were just pale beams lost in the sea of white. The cold seemed to creep into the cab, even with the heater running full blast. I turned up the heat again and leaned forward, trying to make out the road, which was becoming nearly invisible beneath the snow. Every now and then, a gust of wind would howl against the side of the truck, rattling the windows like an unwelcome guest banging on the door. Then, out of the swirling snow, I spotted something. Another rig pulled off the road, its hazard lights blinking faintly. The truck was angled strangely, like it had skidded off the road. My first thought was that the driver might have lost control on the ice. I slowed down as I passed, squinting through the snow. The cab was dark, no movement. I figured the driver had gone for help or was huddled inside waiting for a tow. But something about the way it was just sitting there, abandoned in the storm, sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to keep moving. The last thing I wanted was to end up stuck out here too. I kept driving, the snow getting heavier, the road disappearing more by the second. My eyes were glued to the barely visible white lines on the road when, up ahead, I saw it, a bridge. Through the storm, it loomed like a shadowy figure, stretching over a deep ravine. But that wasn't what caught my attention. No. It was the rig parked right in the middle of the bridge, blocking the road completely. I cursed under my breath. There was no way around it. The truck was parked sideways across the lanes like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Its lights were off and it looked wrong, somehow. Out of place, like it had been there for a long time, even though I knew it couldn't have been. I slowed to a stop, maybe 50 feet from the rig. I honked my horn, expecting someone to come out, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the wind howling through the storm. I flicked my high beams, but the truck remained still as if no one had ever driven it. That's when I noticed something moving. Two figures, barely visible through the snow, emerging from behind the truck. They were slow, almost stumbling, like they weren't used to walking. Their silhouettes were dark against the snow, and for a second I thought maybe they were injured. Maybe they were the drivers of the abandoned rig. But something wasn't right. Their movements were wrong, jerky, almost like they were being pulled by invisible strings. As they came closer, I could make out their faces, or what should have been their faces. Both of them wore masks, pale and featureless, like something out of a nightmare. One had a twisted grin carved into the mask, while the other was expressionless, a blank, hollow face staring at me through the snow. I slammed the door lock, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached for the radio, but all I got was static. The figures kept moving, coming closer, their legs barely bending as they trudged through the snow toward me. I honked the horn again, trying to scare them off, but they didn't flinch. My mind raced. I threw the truck into reverse, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. The figures were nearly at my bumper now, their hollow eyes locked onto my truck. I slammed on the gas, but the tires spun uselessly on the ice. The rig wasn't moving. The figures reached the passenger side door, their hands pressing up against the glass. The one with the grinning mask leaned its head close to the window, tapping its knuckles softly against the glass, like it was asking to be let in. I could hear a faint sound over the storm, whispers. But they weren't coming from the figures. They were coming from all around me, inside the truck, outside, everywhere. The other figure grabbed the handle of the driver's side door, pulling at it violently, but I had locked it just in time. I could see their pale fingers slipping through the crack of the door, pulling harder, as if they were determined to rip it open. In a panic, I slammed on the accelerator again. The wheels finally caught and the truck lurched backward. I swerved, narrowly missing the edge of the bridge as I reversed down the road, the figures still coming toward me, their movements faster now, almost frantic. I kept the rig moving, my eyes glued to the mirrors. They followed me for a few hundred feet before stopping, their forms vanishing into the snowstorm like they were never there. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I finally pulled the rig around, heading back down the road the way I came. The bridge disappeared behind me, swallowed by the storm, and I didn't dare look back. When I reached the next truck stop hours later, I parked, hands still shaking as I killed the engine. The storm had finally let up, and the lot was nearly empty. I sat there, staring out at the snow-covered road, trying to convince myself it had all been some messed-up hallucination brought on by fatigue, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those masks, or the way those figures moved like they weren't human at all, like they were something else, something waiting in the snow, watching, looking for someone to stop on that bridge. And whatever they were still out there, somewhere. I've been a trucker for over 20 years. I've seen just about everything out there on the road. Accidents, strange encounters, long, lonely nights. But nothing compares to what happened to me last winter. It was the first time I truly felt afraid, alone, and completely out of my element. It was supposed to be a routine haul, a quick trip up north to deliver some construction supplies to a small town about 5 hours away. The weather report had mentioned light snow, but nothing too serious. No big deal. I've driven through worse. The roads were clear when I left, and the sky was overcast, but nothing that concerned me. About 2 hours into the drive, the snow started coming down harder. It wasn't a blizzard, not yet, but the flakes were big and heavy, quickly coating the road in a layer of white. Visibility started to drop, and soon enough, I had to slow down to a crawl. Still, I wasn't too worried. I've driven through plenty of snowstorms before. I figured I'd just take it easy and get to my destination a little later than planned. But then, things started getting weird. I was on a long stretch of highway, no other cars in sight. The snow was falling thick and fast now, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The trees lining the road were starting to disappear behind a white curtain, and the sky had this strange, pale grey glow to it. It was the kind of daylight where it felt like the sun was trying to break through the clouds but couldn't quite manage it. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something up ahead. At first, I thought it was another vehicle, maybe a car or another truck pulled off to the side of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't moving. It wasn't a vehicle at all. It was a figure, a person. They were standing in the middle of the road, directly in my path. I slammed on the brakes, my tires skidding across the icy pavement, and managed to come to a stop just a few feet from them. My heart was racing as I stared out the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothes that were barely visible against the snow. They weren't moving, just standing there, facing away from me. Their head was tilted slightly to the side, as if they were listening for something. But they didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. I honked the horn, a short, sharp blast that echoed through the empty landscape. Still, no reaction. The figure didn't move. Something about it made my skin crawl. There was no reason for anyone to be out here in the middle of nowhere, especially in this weather. I thought maybe they were in trouble, stranded or disoriented by the snow. So, reluctantly, I put the truck in park, grabbed my coat, and stepped out into the freezing air. The cold hit me like a slap to the face. The wind was picking up, whipping snow into my eyes as I trudged toward the figure. My boots crunched in the snow and I called out, "Hey, you okay?" No response. I was about 10 feet away when I finally got a good look at them. The figure was wearing an old, tattered coat, the fabric faded and torn. Their hair, or what little I could see of it, was thin and matted, sticking out from under a hood. But what struck me the most was the stillness. Not just their body, but everything around them. The snow was falling hard, but none of it seemed to land on them. It was like they were standing in a bubble of silence, untouched by the storm. "Hey!" I called out again, louder this time. "Do you need help?" They still didn't turn around. I was close enough now that I could reach out and tap them on the shoulder. My hand hovered in the air for a moment, hesitation creeping in. Something in the back of my mind was screaming at me to get back in the truck, to leave, but I couldn't just drive off and leave someone stranded out here. I touched their shoulder lightly. The second my hand made contact, the figure crumbled, literally. The coat fell to the ground in a heap and I jumped back, startled. There was no one inside, no body, no person, just an empty, tattered coat lying in the snow like it had been worn by a ghost. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared at the pile of fabric, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. What the hell had I just seen? I backed away slowly, turning to head back to my truck. I was about halfway there when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound. At first, I thought it was the wind picking up, but it grew louder, more insistent. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. The snow. It was moving, not just blowing across the road like normal. No, the snow itself was shifting, swirling in unnatural patterns, almost like it was alive. It twisted and coiled, forming strange shapes in the air. And then I saw them. More figures. Dozens of them. Shadowy shapes rising up from the snow, their forms barely distinguishable in the whiteout. They were all facing me, motionless, just like the first one. But unlike the first figure, these didn't have coats. They didn't have anything. They were made of the snow itself. I turned and ran. I scrambled back into the truck, slamming the door behind me and locking it, my hands shaking as I fumbled to start the engine. The figures were getting closer now, moving slowly but steadily through the snow. I threw the truck into gear and slammed my foot on the gas. The tires spun for a moment before finally catching, and the truck lurched forward. I sped down the highway, my heart racing, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure the figures weren't following me. The road ahead was barely visible through the blinding snowfall, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. After what felt like hours, the snow finally started to let up. The figures were gone and the road ahead was clear. I drove straight through to the nearest truck stop, pulled into the lot, and parked. My hands were still trembling as I sat there, staring out at the falling snow, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I haven't driven that route since. I still don't know what I saw that day. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the isolation getting to me after years on the road. Or maybe there's something out there in the snow, waiting for the next unlucky driver to pass through. All I know is that I'm never going back.